So my name is Mishra-Newbery, and I am the Director of Global Community for Women's March Global. I'm here today with our coalition members for the Stop Funding War Coalition that's focused on what is happening in Saudi Arabia and also in Yemen. Our coalition is made up of all of the organizations that you see here: Equality Now, Gulf Center for Human Rights, Americans for Human Rights, Americans for Democracy and Human Rights in Bahrain, CIVICUS, and ISHR, which is the International Service for Human Rights. I am very grateful to all of our coalition members, but also the ones that could make it here today. So if you are able to join us in this webinar, this will also be posted after we finish. But if you're able to join us for the webinar, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for taking the time to learn about the work that's being done by all of the organizations here and all of the members here in regards to Saudi Arabia. We want to invite you to leave your questions for our coalition members, either in the chat box. If you're on the webinar in Zoom, we will see the questions that you ask. So please leave your questions for us in Zoom or on the Facebook Live page. So you will see the Facebook Live on Women's March Global and our coalition partner pages. So please leave your questions for our coalition members in the chat box, and we'll have a question answer period at the end of the webinar where we are happy to answer any of your questions. This is our agenda for the webinar. We are going to talk about the coalition itself, the timeline, the petition and the work being done, and the campaign that we all have put together. And then you will hear directly from our coalition members on their perspectives in what is happening in Saudi Arabia and the key takeaways for everyone. So I would like to introduce those that are on the call. So as you've already heard from me, my name is Uma, if you're just joining, and I'm from Women's March Global. I'm the Director of Global Community. And we work with our Free Saudi Women Coalition, which is a collective of women that Saudi women and non-Saudi women that have come together in support of speaking out against the oppression that Saudi women face, and also standing in unity with the women's human rights offenders that were arrested in May and continue to be silenced, and as we're finding out, tortured, and also working to end the war in Yemen. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Salma from ISHR. Salma, could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Uma. My name is Salma Hosseiny. I work for the International Service for Human Rights. We're based in Geneva, Switzerland. We work primarily on the protection of human rights defenders, and I specifically work on advocacy for the Human Rights Council, which is based in Geneva.
Fantastic. And Masana from CIVICUS, can you please introduce yourself?
Great. Hi, I'm Masana Ndinga from CIVICUS. I'm the MENA Advocacy lead here at CIVICUS. We are a global alliance of roughly 4,000 organizations and individuals, and we're part of this coalition. We've been following Saudi Arabia very closely, campaigning, participating in petitions, and ensuring that our members get behind the women human rights defenders that are at risk at the moment.
Fantastic. And Suad from Equality Now.
Yes, thank you. I am Suad Abu-Dayyeh from Equality Now. It is an international legal advocacy organization working for the promotion and protection of women's rights around the world. And we have been really campaigning so much in regard to the activists in Saudi Arabia who are detained from May 2018.
Thank you very much. And Kristina from Gulf Center for Human Rights. Oh, Kristina, I think, there we go. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kristina Stockwood, Chair of the Board of the Gulf Center for Human Rights. We've been working on Saudi Arabia since 2011. And following the cases of women human rights defenders who have been arrested, not just this year, but in the past years, we noticed an alarming escalation starting already at the end of last year, with a woman human rights defender being sentenced to 7 years in prison. And so we are really happy to be part of a coalition working proactively now that this even more alarming crackdown has happened this year since May.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you for joining us. I don't know why this is.
We are
oh, goodness me.
part of a coalition.
Okay, so I don't know. I'm hearing that we are not able to see everyone as they're talking, and I apologize that we are not able to feature videos right now as they're coming on. I'm not sure why that's happening. I'm just trying to see if we can figure out this issue. Just trying to figure out this issue. Oh dear. Hopefully you will be able to see all of us, but it doesn't seem like that is happening. So I'm going to just ask our coalition members, can you please just turn off your videos on and off just to see if that helps rework something for whatever reason. Okay, I don't think that did it, but I'm just going to try one thing. I apologize, everybody, for our technical difficulties. I want to make sure that you're able to see who is talking and who is part of our coalition. So I apologize that we're having some trouble on this, but hopefully we can figure it out, which is interesting. We've never had this issue with Zoom before. So I'm going to jump right in, and I will try to troubleshoot this as we're going along. We want to talk to you as a coalition in regards to what has been happening in Saudi Arabia since May 2018. So since May 2018, and you will have probably seen this if you're following the situation in regards to Saudi Arabia, that 15 women's human rights defenders were arrested in May, and this was ahead of the lift of the driving ban, which happened in June. Some of these human rights defenders, women's human rights defenders, worked actively to campaign for the lift of the driving ban to happen. And they are now in prison, and they have not been released since that time. They've been detained now over 100 days. And there was just an Amnesty report that was released detailing the torture that they are experiencing. They've been put into solitary confinement, and the Saudi government clearly is not responding to international pressure to release these activists. And so every single coalition member that you see here on this call is calling for the unconditional release of these women's human rights defenders. We have a petition on change.org, and you will see the link in the Facebook Live video if you're on that. That has close to 240, that has over 241,000 signatures that has been presented to the UN and different international representatives. And we have partnered with Equality Now and also all of the coalition members to promote this. Please consider signing this petition. I would like to open this up to the panel to also talk about specifically, this timeline of why this started happening in May, and your thoughts, as activists in this space, as these events happen, your experiences.
Great. I'll give it a start. So we know, for example, that last year the law on combating crimes of terrorism was passed in November 2017. We also know that Crown Prince Salman has been pushing a really progressive agenda of Saudi Arabia in the international fora, and Saudi Arabia has been occupying an increasingly influential role in international politics. And The crackdown, I think, in large part is due to the regime's attempts to silence any form of critique against this public image that they've portrayed. It's been a long history of violation and repression against human rights defenders, more broadly speaking, but this is at a level that I think is unprecedented. We've seen a lot of civil society organizations across the world push for more equitable, more just and more fair engagement in public discourse and freedom of assembly and association. And there's only, I think, one way to understand the ways in which the Saudi regime has systematically cracked down on human rights defenders and activists, specifically women, in light of the critique against what they believe is a progressive agenda of change and development. But we know in actual fact is not a systemic recognition of the fundamental rights to freedom of expression, assembly, and association globally.
Thank you, Masana, for that. Salma, do you want to add?
Yeah, no, I just want to add that it also has to do with the message that the Saudi authorities want to send to society, that any change will come from the top up and not from demands by civil society or by Saudi citizens, and also to make it very clear that liberalizing society or any progressive measures or more social freedom does not mean political freedom. And this is the reason why this crackdown came just at the time of lifting the driving ban.
And Kristina and Suad, I would love for you to talk about, I mean, as Salma just said, the crackdown happened and why it happened, but on the exterior surface, the Saudi government has been campaigning to appear more progressive. Can you talk about that false narrative and you know, and the work that the Saudi government is doing on one level, but then on the other level, they're doing something absolutely different?
Yeah, I think the Saudi government is really not genuine in the reforms that they have been doing, because these women who have been campaigning for years to end male guardianship system, the right for women to drive, you know, at the end of the day, they have to be celebrated instead of being imprisoned. So if there was really a political will and a genuine reform in Saudi Arabia, these women should have been in streets celebrating the lift of the ban on women driving. So I don't think that the government is really genuine. And what they are just, you know, the message is that really we will give you what we want to give you, and you should not have the right really to ask for any further, because so many campaigns and Equality Now have really been campaigning for years to end male guardianship system, including, you know, banning child marriage, deprivation of girls to go abroad to study without their muhram accompanying, to be accompanied by male guardians. So the male guardianship system in Saudi Arabia is really is not really helping women to breathe, you know, so they don't really have a freedom of movement, freedom of expression. They have to be controlled by male guardians every now and then. So I think we have really to continue our campaigning to release these women unconditionally, and also to continue campaigning on ending male guardianship system, because this system is really not helping women at all in Saudi Arabia. I mean, in terms of their movements, in terms of their freedom of expression. And I think all these women who are detained, they are activists, and they have been accused of treason because they speak out loud about, you know, the suffering of Saudi women, and this is not acceptable. This is not right, and this is not justice. So I think the international community should put more pressure on Saudi Arabia, you know, in order to release these women and to end male guardianship system there.
Thank you very much, Suad. And Kristina, I would love for you to add your thoughts here in regards to the situation with the women's human rights defenders and, you know, what Saudi Arabia as a government is doing on one hand, but then, you know, doing to women and the continued, as Suad said, you know, male guardianship has been going on for a very long time. This is not a new issue. The oppression of women has been existing for a very long time. In Saudi Arabia. Can you speak a little bit more to that and expand on that?
I think what's notable is that the range of people who've been arrested, it's not just some of the very well-known driving activists, it's also young women who are tired of this. It's a prominent academic, Dr. Hatun al-Fatasi. She was arrested. Some of them were arrested before the driving ban was lifted, but she actually posted a photo. Hey, I'm driving, great. Within days, she was arrested. And she hadn't been, you know, a vocal driving campaign activist. Of course, she's a prominent women's rights specialist and academic, but, and not just women, there also have been men who have been arrested. And people like recently, a male economist was arrested for talking about the Vision 2030 plan and saying, actually, no, you know, some of these reforms are superficial and you have to do more, not just in terms of the ability of the citizens to act and work freely, but also some ideas related to the economy and gas. And I think what's really chilling is that before the driving ban was lifted, that activists did receive phone calls and warnings saying, you know, go out and drive and celebrate it, but don't put any even hint of criticism like, finally I can drive. No, you can't, you know, you can't frame it in a negative way. And look what happened. Some of them didn't even get the chance to drive. You know, they were already in jail, like Loujain al-Hathoul on May 15th. Not only was Loujain arrested, and she had been one of the most prominent driving activists. She'd been arrested previously in her car at the border, but she was actually forcibly kidnapped and brought from the Emirates. And that is really horrifying. And I think that's, you know, that was the day we knew that the situation was really terrible. And it was sort of doubly horrifying to start seeing things like Vogue celebrating women get to drive, and already we knew there were women in prison for this. So I think, you know, it dates back certainly further than this year when you started seeing, we've got a woman serving a 7-year prison sentence who was arrested last year. We've got Israel Gankam, who was arrested during protests in Al-Khatif in 2015, and after 3 years, she's finally brought to trial, and the prosecutor is calling for her death by beheading. Before even hearing the facts of the case, he's saying, I want the death penalty. I mean, this is an outrageous abuse of due process, and it shows you really the wide extent and the history of the extent of the crackdown on women human rights defenders. One would think that now wouldn't be the time to talk about killing a woman human rights defender in prison, especially with Jamal Khashoggi's murder by dismemberment. You would also think, maybe the time is to show some leniency to these women. I guess I had a little hope some of them might have been freed or some positive steps would have happened after Khashoggi's murder. And yet what we've seen is the opposite, is that now there's a crackdown in the prisons on the women, some of whom, you know, are friends and colleagues. So it's extremely painful.
Thank you very much, Kristina. And I think as everyone has spoken about here, this is personal. What is happening to these women in prison, these women human rights defenders in prison, is deeply personal for many of us, and it's why we're here in this coalition. And as we've seen, even with international pressure surrounding the murder of Jamal and the international pressure in regards to Yemen and the international pressure in regards to women's human rights defenders, the Saudi government hasn't responded in a manner where they understand the importance of releasing these activists and doing the right thing here. And so as a coalition, we are continuously talking and seeing how we can continue to do the work of holding Saudi Arabia accountable. And so just on the 5th of November, we released our next action, which is Stop Funding War. From a peace perspective and from a feminist peace perspective, I think it's important, a lot of people, the question might be, well, how does the war in Yemen relate to what's happening to women human rights defenders in Saudi Arabia? And also, how does it relate to male guardianship? We have to recognize that the people that are making these decisions and the people that are in power are the same people that are literally, signing the contracts, for these arms sales. They are the same people that are silencing and imprisoning women's human rights defenders. They are the same people that are enacting laws that enforce male guardianship. So from a feminist peace perspective, we have to look at it as to how these issues are interlinked, which is why, as a coalition, we put together this campaign on Stop Funding War. And so we want to take you through the background of this campaign and what we're talking about here. These are 5 facts that you should know about Saudi Arabia, and this is also included on the call to action page, which you will see in the link on the Facebook Live video. But I think it's important to understand the international complicity of a lot of governments and countries that they have in funding the war in Yemen. There are many countries that literally have blood on their hands because of the fact that they have sold arms to Saudi Arabia. These stats that are listed on the page in regards to the amounts are from the past 7 years. So when we're saying 2.6 trillion US dollars of arms were bought by Saudi Arabia from the United States, from Canada, from France, the UK, and so many countries, and you'll see on the link provided in Facebook Live, there are many countries listed, and we'll also show you on the next slide a few of the countries. But I would like to open this up to the coalition to talk about these 5 facts. Why are these important? Why is it so important that people understand that the crisis that is happening in Yemen is linked to what is happening in Saudi Arabia? So Salma, I'm going to turn this over to you. If you can take us through it first, that would be great.
Well, first of all, it is the same government that is leading the coalition war in Yemen, that is killing civilians, that is blocking humanitarian access, blocking the ports. And this sense of the war in Yemen has been since 2016, and it's only recently that there has been more media attention and more pressure on the authorities, on the coalition to end the war. But this level of impunity that the Saudi authorities have enjoyed for almost since forever has emboldened them to continue the repression internally, as well as have these war adventures that was killing civilians and starving them in Yemen. And so the international community really needs to step up their efforts and finally hold Saudi Arabia accountable, because if not, if what happened to Jamal Khashoggi does not just expose the level of brutality and complete disregard for human rights, and the situation in Yemen doesn't do it, then what will? So it is really important that more action is taken. And I also wanted to add about the human rights defenders. So a lot of states, they call on defending women's rights. They call on Saudi Arabia to advance women's rights. They supported Mohammed bin Salman because he presented this image of, I'm going to lift the driving ban and I'm going to liberate Saudi society. But Saudi Arabian society is a very particular society, and so it is the role of the women human rights defenders to lead that change. And the role of the international community is to support them, is to get them out of jail, is to enable them to continue their fight. And this is the only way that we're going to have sustainable advancements in women's rights in Saudi Arabia.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Salma. Masana, I want to ask you, a lot of people will say, you know, that when a country like, for example, the United States is in such vocal support of Saudi Arabia, how do we interact, you know, like how do we navigate that? Because the things that are listed on this slide, you know, are not benign facts. These are incredibly important. They carry a lot of weight. So I would love for you to speak to them.
Yeah, definitely. I think what you've highlighted is particularly important. Earlier this year, as everyone would be aware, Canada came out in support of the women human rights defenders that had been detained in Canada. And instead of international solidarity shown to those women human rights defenders, a number of countries stood at the sidelines while Saudi Arabia launched a very aggressive campaign against Canada. And knowing that the international community and the multilateral bodies like the United Nations and the Human Rights Council are facing a crisis of legitimacy because of the infiltration and influence of governments, not always in defense of human rights. It's now more critical than it has ever been that we see really strong actors take the lead in forging the type of human rights community and respect for law that we espouse to. And when I say law, I refer specifically to the international covenants that are designed to protect the most vulnerable populations in society. I think really the challenge has been that the United States, in its endorsement of Saudi Arabia, even after the CIA came out with evidence that Saudi Arabia was directly involved in the killing of Khashoggi, points to the need now more than ever for those who live in democratic societies, who have the power to engage with their leaders ahead of elections, to vote for the type of leaders that will continue to champion human rights internationally. And that's why the change.org petition is so important. That's why the Stop Funding War campaign is essential in this time, as we are at a watershed moment globally where we need to hold our politicians to account, and elections remain one of the ways in which we can ensure solidarity and support for human rights defenders in countries like Saudi Arabia that act in complete impunity, not just of the people, the citizens that look to them for protection, but also for those who are in exile, crossing borders, detaining, abducting human rights defenders, breaching internet security to hack into the accounts of activists or anyone who speaks out against regimes, sets a very dangerous precedent for not just one country, but for all countries of the world. And I think in this time, the United States, along with even the smaller countries, so South Africa is one of those countries that has sold arms to Saudi Arabia, that now more than ever, we look to these countries to take seriously their mandates to human rights.
Thank you so much, Masana. And it's so incredibly important what you said about the fact that we live in free democratic societies, and it is our responsibility to speak out, because there are so many that cannot do this, that are imprisoned, that are, you know, that are silenced in such horrible ways that we know of. Suad, I want to bring up this point. Yesterday was International Women Human Rights Defenders Day, and you know, as you spoke earlier, you were talking about male guardianship and the oppression that Saudi women face. But this is not alone. Like, this is not a singular circumstance that happens just in Saudi Arabia. And as we're talking about arms sales, and as we're talking about complicities of other governments here, can you speak to how important it is to recognize the interconnections between different countries and the experiences of women human rights defenders within this network?
First of all, I want to say that I was very happy to see the demonstration against Prince Prince bin Salman to Tunisia. I mean, this was also an indication that people, the Tunisian people, they are not really supporting what is going on, and they are not, and they are refusing the policy of Saudi Arabia in cracking down on women and human rights activists. And I can say it's not just women, but also there has been reports about so many men who have been active and are in jail, and still they are in jail. So these small movements of people, I think we should strengthen these movements in order to really to start, you know, because I think what is going on and how the US policy is really supporting fully Saudi Arabia is not really acceptable. And of course, it goes back to money and power. At the end of the day, so US, America, they don't want to lose trillions of money for the sake of Jamal, for example, or for the sake of these women who have been detained. So this is very sadly, I am saying this is very sadly, but I was also thrilled about other countries that they have boycotted and refused to sell arms to Saudi Arabia, such as like Germany, Sweden, and Danish, and the other countries. So we need to bring more voices into stopping the crackdown really on activists and silencing human rights activists, especially that yesterday was also the day for human rights defenders. And sadly, I have to say that it is not just in Saudi Arabia that human rights defenders are silenced and imprisoned and tortured, but also we have also a crackdown on that, for example, in Egypt, where women have been confiscated their personal assets, like Azza Sulaiman, for example, and Amal Fathi. In Iraq, women have been killed recently because they have been active in women and human rights activists. So we are, unfortunately, we are in the region witnessing a crackdown and torturing and silencing and killing of women and activists because just they are activists, and we need to see more globally on the regional level, but also on the international level, more support to our region. I mean, in terms of, you know, boycotting, like, for example, Saudi Arabia, the repertoires for human rights defenders, they should really work more on that issue because it is not acceptable anymore to have such chaos in our countries.
Thank you so much, Suad, and you know, absolutely correct that the UN rapporteurs need to do more here and apply more pressure. Kristina, I want to turn to you, and can you please speak to specifically the situation that is happening in Yemen and how Saudi Arabia is, you know, when we're saying the Saudi-led coalition, what does that mean? But then also, what does it mean? You know, it's not just the Saudi-led coalition, it's also the US contributing to that, and France and so many other countries.
Yeah, in fact, we just found out that there's evidence that Canadian weapons sold to Saudi Arabia have been found on the ground in Yemen. So Canada is directly complicit. And for all its talk on women human rights defenders, Canada still hasn't canceled $15 billion worth of contracts with the Saudis. So I certainly appreciate the feminist attitude of our government. I'm Canadian, by the way, but we need to see the action demonstrated by canceling those arms deals. If a nation like Germany, a large nation that also sells a lot of arms, can cancel the deal, then I think that Canada should be able to do that as well. And I echo the comments of the others, you know, welcoming that Denmark and Finland and Sweden and Germany have canceled those arms deals. And right now, that's really one of the only tangible things that we can talk about. There was a small effort in the US to say we are not going to be refueling planes in Saudi Arabia mid-air for bombing Yemen. So that's one step. So it's not necessarily canceling, you know, billions of arms deals, but I feel like maybe in some cases we're going to have to look for smaller gains in terms of what's happening on the ground in Yemen. And the lack of political will to solve this, you know, contest of wills against the different sides in Yemen is really frustrating. And I know that the UN, the people at the UN who are working on this and other states parties find it frustrating because nobody wants to back down, and you know, who's going to go first in actually implementing a ceasefire. But for us, our concern is what's happening to the people on the ground, the over 10,000 people who've been injured or killed, the impact of it on human rights defenders who are not only trying to just do their work, but while facing the issue of food insecurity, or when they're documenting violations such as bombings, are they themselves going to be hit? Like Riyam al-Badr in February in Yemen, she was documenting and carrying out humanitarian work, and she was killed. So I think we have to look at the wide-ranging impacts, and I think, you know, the New York Times did a good piece on the children that were starving in Yemen and saying, stop talking about politics. We are talking about human lives on a daily basis. And every day that you don't take action is a day that people are dying, children are dying. So I think that is what led to the decision in the US to try to stop refueling mid-air on airstrikes. But I really think that other countries like Canada have to step up and stop arming Saudi Arabia and the impact it has in Yemen, but also Canadian-made weapons being used to suppress citizens at home.
Thank you so much, Kristina, and you're absolutely correct. You know, in that we have to hold governments responsible when we're saying that 3/4 of Yemen's population are in need of humanitarian aid because of the war that has gone on now for years. This is not a insignificant number. You know, that is 3/4 of an entire population, and you know, I want that to sink into those who are watching, those who will watch this in the future. So you can go on the site that is on the Facebook Live link and look at all of the numbers that have come through that we have put together for the past 7 years. France, you know, has sold a total of $919 million worth of arms deals with Saudi Arabia, 6.4 for Belgium, 6.4 billion for Belgium. These are not small amounts. These are incredible amounts of money that have gone into Saudi Arabia to wage a war in Yemen. There is a direct link. So if you are living in one of these countries that is listed, you need to be speaking out. You know, especially as I think it was Masana that said, you know, if you're living in peace and in safety in a democratic society and your country is on this list, you need to then follow through with the call to action. That is what we are asking you to do. And as Kristina said, you know, there are countries that have stepped up and, you know, and halted their arms sales. These countries include Germany, Switzerland, Denmark, Finland, and Norway. But then also just this week, we learned of the bill that Bernie Sanders has been pushing through the Senate for a very long time in regards to Yemen, and that was voted on and it passed. So the discussion on halting U.S. arms sales now, you know, is serious, but the president of the United States has threatened to veto that bill if it comes through. So, you know, those living in the United States need to apply pressure because you know, the United States is the largest arms exporter to Saudi Arabia. That is not also an insignificant number. You can find the call to action on the site, and we ask you to join us in this campaign, calling for an end to arms sales to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and also the immediate release of Saudi activists. The email addresses are there. There's a sample email that is there that is put together. All you literally have to do is copy and paste it, input the numbers, and send it off. We invite you to do that. I mean, it will take literally 10 minutes to email that list, 10 minutes out of your day. Please do that. You know, it is one thing that you can do to really help in this campaign. So from this point on, what I would like to do is just turn it over for some final thoughts and perspectives from our coalition members. You know, each of us brings a different viewpoint on this situation. And I think it's important to hear from all of our coalition members on what they're looking at and what they're interacting with, and the narratives that they're working through as they are in this space. And so I'm going to turn it over to Masana from CIVICUS to talk about her perspective.
Thanks, Uma. So I'll be very brief, just to say that globally we see a trend of shrinking space. This data is taken from the CIVICUS Monitor, which tracks the rates of civic space available to populations around the world. And what we see is that Saudi Arabia remains actually one of the closest spaces in the world globally, which is fundamentally a problem. The Thomson Reuters Foundation found that it was the 5th most dangerous place to be a woman. And then if we go very quickly to the next slide, the interesting thing that we're finding is that across the world, amongst all of those involved in civic space incidents, so incidents where there have been attacks, it's that women that have been the #1 target of these attacks. And these restrictions specifically for the Saudi women human rights defenders are not just restrictions based on their human rights activities, but restrictions that they face within their families and within their communities for breaking out of patriarchal norms. And so even in our conception of what it means to be a woman human rights defenders, we also need to be aware that even within the human rights community, that Saudi women human rights activists face additional levels and layers of restrictions that need to be addressed, that the threats are multiple. We see a number of reports in which women are being targeted in their homes. Women face higher incidences of smear campaigns online. The threat of sexual violence and sexual harassment is also more pronounced, but also that women with children who do human rights activism are more likely to have their children threatened in these contexts. And so really thinking about the protection mechanisms that are necessary for women human rights defenders that have to take an all-encompassing view, not just to cross-cut and copy and paste mechanisms for the protection of human rights defenders, but rather to take a very nuanced feminist perspective in our protection mechanisms. And I really encourage, if we have any UN special rapporteurs engaging with this. I know, for example, that Michael Force, the special rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, will be taking a unique perspective, focusing on women human rights defenders in 2019, to encourage our partners and those attending to follow those conversations and show solidarity to the nuanced needs of women human rights defenders in Saudi Arabia and across the world.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Masana, for that perspective and for the work that CIVICUS is doing in documenting, you know, the landscape. We invite you to follow the work of CIVICUS. We'll put their link to their Facebook page and also their website on the Facebook Live. So please go ahead and follow them on Facebook. I'm going to now turn it over to Salma from the International Service for Human Rights. And if you can take us through your perspective.
Yes, sure. First, I want to remind everyone who's watching why these women were arrested. They were arrested for demanding equality in really the basic sense of it. So imagine if you're a woman in Saudi Arabia, you cannot make major life decisions that affect you without the consent of your male guardian. Now, your male guardian could be your father, but it also can be your husband, your uncle, even your son. So you cannot apply for a passport, you cannot travel, you cannot study abroad on government scholarship without the permission of your male guardian. And this is just what is prescribed by the law. Now, in practice, these restrictions are even more because of the patriarchal society that Saudi women live in. Above all of that, above the specific threats that women human rights defenders face, as my colleague Masana said, the Saudi government basically arrests anyone who demands that their human rights. So this is the context where these women are struggling. Now, I also want to tell you a bit more about what the UN is doing. So several independent human rights experts have called on Saudi Arabia to immediately release the women. Saudi Arabia is also a member of the Human Rights Council, which is the UN's top intergovernmental rights body. Yet despite that, the council has failed to take any meaningful action on Saudi. Earlier this month, Saudi underwent its UPR review. So it's a review that happens every 4 to 5 years where all states undergo a review process to improve the human rights situation in their country. And there were a lot of states, almost 40, who made recommendations specifically related to freedom of expression. Some of them called for the release of defenders, and particularly the women human rights defenders. But now the challenge that we are facing is that states are speaking separately, but they are not speaking together, and they are not speaking through one unified voice of through the Human Rights Council. So this is what we are doing here from Geneva. We're trying to push governments who say that that Saudi Arabia should release these women and release these activists, but to say it together, because that will give more pressure on the Saudi authorities and help us to achieve releasing these women. So I would like to call on you on how you can help us by contacting your local parliamentarians. You can contact your Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You can even contact the mission of your country in Geneva. You can just Google it. You'll find the email. You'll find the number. Call them and tell them you already called for the release of the women human rights defenders. Now it's time to say it again with a louder voice and with a joint voice.
Thank you so much, Salma. And as always in the Facebook live video, you will find the link to ISHR's Facebook page and also their website. Please follow the work that they are doing. And also, I would say that definitely their expertise on the UN system and what's happening within that space is quite unparalleled. So please follow what they're doing. And Salma, thank you so much for your perspective. Kristina, I want to turn it over to you in regards to the Gulf Center for Human Rights and your perspective from the Gulf Center.
Okay, well, we're working on many levels right now. Where do I start? Basically, Saudi Arabia this year has taken over much of the work of the Women's Human Rights Defenders Program, and even the work of the organization as a whole, where basically it's all hands on deck. 30 out of 100 of the cases we've reported in the wider, in the Middle East, but in particular in the Gulf and the neighboring countries, have been from Saudi Arabia. So it's really escalated. We have always had many cases of men human rights defenders, but the increase in women human rights defenders just in the past year, I would say the last full 12 months has been extremely alarming. And so we've been working on a multi-pronged level with some of the partners in the coalition, well, all of the partners in the coalition on the joint actions and petitions, as well as approaches to CEDAW, to the Universal Periodic Review of Saudi Arabia, other UN, holding UN side events, making approaches with the special rapporteurs, and then doing appeals and urgent actions, as well as trying to engage the public on this issue. And of course, appealing directly to countries who are party to the violations, or who may have some kind of influence with Saudi Arabia. And so what we're looking for is the Saudi authorities to repeal the sentences and free the human rights defenders who are currently in prison, end the use of the death penalty as a threat for peaceful human rights activities, stop trying human rights defenders in a security court. This court has been used almost exclusively to try human rights defenders rather than for actual security issues. And we're calling for generally women to be free and equal and to abolish the guardian system. And then in parallel, we're calling for really hard action for the UN, for example, to kick Saudi Arabia off the Human Rights Council. It's just incomprehensible how they got on there in the first place and why they remain given these human rights violations. So we're really looking for action from the UN, states parties, and citizens in general.
Thank you so much, Kristina, and thank you for your perspective. And completely agree that, and as Salma said as well, you know, Saudi Arabia is on the Human Rights Council, yet they are in gross violation of human rights, and that needs the accountability needs to be there. Suad, I would like for you, if you could give your perspective from Equality Now on, you know, the landscape and what you see, and moving forward, what your call to action would be.
Thank you. Of course, as Equality Now, also in partnership with lots of organizations and the Global March and the other members, we will continue to campaign with the UN actors and states and companies to take really action to end the arrest of these women and to free all women who have been detained since ever in the prisons of Saudi Arabia. We want to see more action from the governments, really to put pressure on the Saudi government to stop, not just you know, to free these women, but also to stop the wars. Yani, our region, MENA region, is very much tired of being under war for so many years, like in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq still, I mean. So we want to see the Middle East countries living in peace and in dignity, including women, all members of communities and societies. And we want also to see the people and the companies who are investing in Saudi Arabia to stop, you know, investing in Saudi Arabia, such as in regard to selling cars, for example. We have been yesterday we called those companies who pulled out of the investment conference that was last month in Saudi Arabia over the killing to Jamal, to also stand with Saudi women. So these companies, they boycotted the conference because of the case of the Jamal. But also women, you know, they have also a part of that, and so many companies, they can make a difference in the lives of people in Saudi Arabia, and in particular for women. We want to see a political will and a genuine reforms in Saudi Arabia, not just you know, fake reforms as it is now, but we want to dismantle male guardianship system that persists and still continues to harass and submit women in Saudi Arabia. So this is it.
Thank you so much, Suad, and for your perspective. I want to just end by saying that you know, this webinar is going to be on our Facebook page and also on our partners' Facebook pages, and you have all of the links in the comment section of this Facebook Live, so you can follow any one of these absolutely amazing organizations here, and we really invite you to leave your questions for us. At the moment, I don't see any questions, so we're going to wrap up this video, but I want to, before we end, just say a massive thank you to every single woman that is on this webinar panel today. You know, this coalition, you know, we're very proud from Women's March Global to be a part of this coalition, and the work that every single organization here is doing is important. And, you know, as a united coalition, I think it's incredible that we can come together to help move the needle forward as much as possible in regards to women's rights in Saudi Arabia. So thank you so much for taking the time. Suad from Equality Now, Masana from CIVICUS, Salma from ISHR, and Kristina from Gulf Center for Human Rights. If you have any questions for any one of our coalition partners, leave them in the Facebook comments and we will send them to our coalition partners. And thank you so much for watching. Make sure that you send out those emails. Make sure that you hold the UN accountable. Make sure that you hold your country's governments. If you live in a country that is selling arms to Saudi Arabia, hold them accountable. As Masana said, and I think it's an incredibly important reminder, especially given that yesterday was the International Women Human Rights Defenders Day. If you are living in a safe and democratic society and you have the freedom to speak out without fear of repression, use your voice. That is what each and every one of us on this panel are asking you to do. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you to all of our wonderful coalition partners. Bye.